Did CNN edit out criticism of its network during an interview with RT anchor Anissa Naoué? CNN anchor Christiane Amanpour was interviewing Naoué about whether or not RT and Russian media in general is helping to advance Vladimir Putin's aggression toward Ukraine. Here's a clip.
Do you feel that Russia Today and other state-sponsored media is specifically designed to counter what your government, your president believes is a bad image problem, an unfair shake in the West?
Just to be clear, he's not my president. I'm an American. He's the Russian president. And Russia Today airs to a global audience. So it's not really watched in Russia. It's in English.
In all, the interview posted by CNN was 9 minutes and 30 seconds on air and online. But what the viewers of the program did not see was a wild exchange where Naoué called out Amanpour for towing the State Department line for some 15 years. While CNN did not air it, RT was recording on Anissa's end. Here's what was said.
Certainly at Russia Today, we always try to show both sides of the story. Do we show more of a Russian perspective? Of course we do, because that's the perspective that's being sidelined. But it's an absurd question coming from someone that's propagated the line of the State Department for over 15 years. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. You've propagated the line of the State Department for over 15 years, starting with Yugoslavia and all the way into Syria. And now you're doing it for Ukraine, essentially. Absolutely, I'm talking to you. I've seen lots of your reports, and in not one report will you find you questioning the United States government and their policy. And we, with our Russian propaganda, question those arms to the FSA, question those arms to al-Nusra and other links. And now today, we have ISIS. But your audience should be aware of this, Christiane. Your audience should be aware of this. You should disclose this to them. I'm glad they do, and I'm sure they know who James Rubin is. I'm sure they watched your work in Yugoslavia. Right, how dare someone tell CNN to check who their sponsors are, what governments they're working with? How dare someone come on CNN and say that? Well, let your viewers decide, Christiane. I think that's the fairest way out of this debate. Let your viewers decide. Let them go back to your work in Yugoslavia. Let your viewers decide. Let them go back to your work in Yugoslavia and see if it doesn't fall exactly in line with the State Department's line.
Of course, viewers would not be given the opportunity to see any of that because none of that exchange was aired or released in video form online. I spoke earlier with Anissa Naoué from Moscow and began by asking her if she's surprised that the exchange didn't make air.
I'm not. I knew that was going to happen. And I should point out, of course, the whole video wasn't aired on CNN. I knew that was going to happen. I only decided to really point out these criticisms that I have in general of CNN after I'd been getting very loaded questions for about 20 minutes. And nothing I seemed to say, any facts I presented seemed to be enough or enough for us to move on from this constant question about Russian propaganda and showing one side and sort of the Russian media. And we didn't talk about politics. We didn't really talk about policy. We didn't really debate, essentially. And so after I understood it was pretty much a useless interview, I thought it'd be interesting to actually bring up something that might matter to CNN's audience.
Yeah, not sure if I would call it a useless interview on CNN's end, because it seems like there was certainly a use for you being there, which was to further push this idea that they've been pushing for really months now, that nothing being said on RT is credible. But you really shredded, Christiane, over what you called 15 years of towing the State Department line. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it goes back to, further back to a film that I did in Yugoslavia last summer. She was the face of CNN during the Bosnian War, the lead up to the bombing of Serbia and Yugoslavia, and she was the face of CNN during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. And at the time, I was very young. I didn't really understand what was happening, but being back there last summer and meeting, you know, people whose children were bombed by NATO planes for no reason, sort of civilian casualties, going to schools, going to television centers where journalists were attacked, basically, in this brash violation of international law, something that Christiane herself always preaches about, really hit home for me. And I sift through tons and tons of specifically CNN archive. And so I know the coverage of the war in Yugoslavia specifically. It's a war that Christiane openly calls her war. And so I wanted to point out how much of this war really is hers.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, we should point out that while CNN did not put the video up online in its totality, they did publish the transcript for it. And you folks can go there. You can go to CNN.com, the blog's there, and read the full transcript. What I thought was fascinating in reading that exchange between the two of you was that Christiane did not bother to refute any of the points that you were making. She gave up the no, that's not true. But she did not come through and say, you're wrong, and let's refute why you're wrong.
And it's interesting enough, one of her main arguments was go back and watch my material, to which I right away said, I've seen most of your material. And the one specific material I spoke about it concerning Syria, I brought up her reports sort of about the FSA, how they needed more backing, her sort of anti-Assad reporting on the ground. I brought that up and then tied it into what we're seeing now happening with ISIS. And not only did she not respond to that, but that was actually a piece that was cut out of the so-called full transcript on the CNN website.
And so specific to the discussions about Assad was cut out, because there is a mention in the transcripts there about you mentioning ISIS, al-Nusra Front, and the FSA. So was there an additional exchange there that I did not read?
Yeah, I would say go to RT.com. We published our version. We recorded the entire interview, and there's not much. They did publish 95% of the interview, but there are a couple of points that I brought up that didn't make it onto air or into their full transcript.
What I thought was most interesting out of all of this is that after you went after her on this, and I thought, again, you were bringing up points. You weren't attacking her character per se, but attacking her journalistic history, which she should be able to defend. But you knew that none of this would ever make air, because she says, at the end of that transcript, she says, now I have to pretend to thank you. And then she thanks you, knowing that that means it's going to be cut out so that none of this appears to ever have existed in the first place. Did you realize at that moment it would never be aired?
I sort of knew from the beginning, Ben, to be honest, when I was going on CNN, that this wasn't a live interview and that it was going to be cut to fit their line. I mean, I've been observing media, specifically CNN, for a long time. I covered a lot on In the Now. So I knew what I was getting into. And I didn't think the interview would be as long as it was. We had some technical problems. Our conversation went on for some 30 minutes or so. So I knew it was going to be cut. I just thought it was interesting exactly what they left in, how sloppy the edits were, and then, of course, that they didn't publish the full video, which they actually promised they would do on their site, just the transcript. But that's good enough. I'm glad people got to see what was said off camera.
Yeah, even so, though, I mean, you don't put the video up, it doesn't have the same effect. Last thing I'd ask you, Anissa, is this part of the bigger story surrounding Western media claims of RT as Russian propaganda? I know that you, on your show, as you mentioned in the Now, you take on this issue quite often. But is this just another example, do you think, of how blatant some of that Western response is?
Yeah, I think if you read the transcript very carefully, there was very few arguments, even against Russian policy. The argument was RT and all Russian media is propaganda. Okay, you've made the statement. Now give us some examples. There was one example given about some footage that was fake footage shown on another internal Russian channel. We didn't show it. And then I then pointed out that CNN has made very of the same mistakes. And of course, we need to condemn this sort of taking the bait and showing fake footage in order to try to get a scoop or be first. But CNN is quite well known for making those mistakes too. And I think that's what really stood out, was that I came on CNN, and because the debate was going nowhere, I decided to actually bring up points and kind of misinformation that's presented by CNN constantly.
Got off script. Host of In the Now, Anissa Naoué from Moscow. Thank you very much.